Alright, so here we are in front of the elephants.
It was a pretty sunset.
Alright, howdy, and welcome back to Film Asterisk. It has come to that great time of year. Yes, time for our annual Halloween episode, which I'm sure you noticed by our Halloween theme song, the theme from 1933's The Invisible Man. But yeah, in today's episode, we will kind of be doing a new format, something a bit more communal, as I've asked various friends of the show to contribute a different movie recommendation for this spooky time of year. A lesser known Halloween film that you may not know and could really have a lot of fun with. So in this first portion, I will kind of just serve as a moderator of sorts in between sections, and then we'll finish off with my pick. But to start off, I want to bring on the previous host of Film and from seasons 1 through 4, Connor. Take it away, buddy.
Hey friends. Dan asked me to come and talk about a scary movie for the holiday season. This is my first episode of Season 7, and by extension, my first time in the post-Champlain era. It's crazy that Film and is now a thing of the past. I'm excited for this new period, and you guys will hear a lot more of me soon. I'm not nearly as good at the scripted stuff as Dan is, but I wanted to make my thoughts kind of organized and not rambly, so I'll try my best. There were a few movies that crossed my mind, be it the classics like the first Evil Dead or John Carpenter's Halloween, or a film that really surprised me recently, like Jamie Collet-Serra's Orphan. I chose for something more recent and maybe bucking some expectations. The biggest being, despite a very subtle but incredible jump scare, the film is far from scary in a traditional sense. Today, I've decided to talk about one of my favorite films of the year so far, and I'm probably going to mispronounce this director's name, so forgive me, but Helene Regine's Gen Z slasher, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. I won't be going to any kind of major spoilers for the film, because I really want you to go in and have a completely organic experience, especially Dan, when you watch it with me very soon. For those of you who don't know, the logline for the film was as follows. When a group of 20-somethings get stuck at a remote mansion during a hurricane, a party game goes very, very wrong, and ends up with a dead body on the ground, and fake friends at every turn as they try to find the killer among them. When this film was first announced and the first members of the cast signed on, it was referred to as this generation's Scream, which, if you know me, made me very amped and very skeptical in equal measure. Scream, for me, is the height of the genre and holds a very special place in my heart. Anything that claims to be the next one has very big shoes to fill. This movie has a lot of surprises, but the biggest is that I kind of agree with that seemingly lofty claim. While Scream is a commentary on the 90s culture and horror cinema, Bodies shifts its perspective to today in the internet culture and does not pull any proverbial punches. Gone are the mentions of the horror rules or the role of the final girl. Instead, the characters discuss their social media accounts and feel more victimized by someone not responding in the group chat or not liking their podcast, more than the killer picking them off one by one. The film finds its footing in this generation by not talking down to Gen Z or using buzzwords for the sake of it, but instead using those words and what they devolved into honestly. This is what makes the satire even more charming. We're not laughing at someone who claims to have been triggered by the actions of their friends. We're laughing at someone who's trying to use a real term as armor. Someone who knows they can use someone else's pain as an excuse to hide from criticism. This person is deserving of mockery, just like our generation is. We don't really mean what we say. We don't care about others. We just claim to because it only helps us in the end. Once a killer is introduced, the friendships we hold dear melt away. We're no longer allies. When someone else is around, we reduce them to monsters. How they must want to kill us because they're jealous of us or have a mental illness. When someone raises a good point against us, they must be gaslighting. The real killer is our selfishness, how the internet has led to a world where the image we present is more important than the people next to us. So yeah, not the kind of scary other people are probably going for, but it's the one that stays long after midnight on Halloween for me. This film's also a big Andy's contender for me. As you can tell, I really enjoy it. So hopefully you guys will check out Bodies, Bodies, Bodies and form your own opinions. And hopefully you enjoy it, because it is kind of controversial. Okay.
Thank you, Connor. It is true, I have yet to see Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. I myself am quite skeptical, but as Connor said, I think you need to watch it to truly understand what it's commenting on and what it's spoofing and how it's kind of satirizing our generation. I am excited to see how it does that. I don't know how I'm going to feel about it, but I am excited to watch it, especially now that Connor has talked about it. So I guess moving on to our next special guest here on the show. It'll be another familiar voice that you probably heard last time. It would have been the Western movie bracket we did in season 6. I am, of course, talking about friend of the show, Steve, who has made numerous appearances. You know who he is. So, Steve, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Herron. You may know me from the Hulkback Mountain episode, or Best Picture 1975, or the Western Bracket, or all sorts of great content. I love being on Film and Film Asterisk as much as possible. And tonight, I've set a mood. I'm sitting in a dark room, only by candlelight, because Sir Daniel asked me to pick a Halloween favorite to celebrate the season, and one of the first films that came to mind is actually a film that I had not only never seen before, but never heard of before 5 days ago. And that's a Hammer horror film from 1971 called Twins of Evil.
Oh, God, have mercy on this poor, unfortunate creature.
In old Gothic Europe, they had two burning passions: witch hunting and devil worship. They look alike. They dress alike. Two identical beauties. But one of them has the very devil in her.
The devil has sent me twins of evil.
Which I saw as part of the exhumed filmed 15th annual 24-hour horror-thon at the Colonial Theater in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. Twins of Evil was film number 7, 8, I believe. It was the 10:30 p.m. film, and that's the exact perfect context to view the film. It is a film that you want to watch late at night, leading right up to the witching hour. The best way I can describe Twins of Evil is think The Crucible, but hornier and with vampires. For those of you not familiar with Hammer, a brief bit of history, and when I say brief, I promise I will try to keep it brief. Hammer was a small British studio that, in the years after World War II, specialized in genre fare and B pictures. Think crime films, think Agatha Christie-esque mysteries, think melodramas. And by the mid-1950s, they had established a really strong niche for themselves with horror films. Essentially, the early Hammer horror films were reinventions of the classic Universal monsters, with films like Curse of Frankenstein and The Horror of Dracula. They took these really familiar monsters and they gave it a more modern sheen. They were shot in Technicolor. They sort of had a dry British cheekiness to them. They were closer to chamber dramas than the sort of grand theatrical Universal productions of 20 years prior. And they were a little bit sexier. The Brits love their corsets. And over the course of 10, 15 years, they had a really successful model of churning out monster films in this way. And they would do other things. They would make science fiction films. But by the time you reach the late 1960s, the Hammer style was getting a bit repetitive, and they were sort of losing steam with audiences. Twins of Evil comes at the very, very, very tail end of the Hammer golden era, and is in the ranks with films like Dracula 1972 AD, in an attempt to sort of revive the studio, not only into a new decade, but into a sort of new filmmaking philosophy. We're part of a grand escalations of the in-house Hammer style. While not necessarily gory, they were definitely more viscerally violent than previous Hammer films, and while there was sort of a tongue-in-cheek overall sexiness, the Karnstein trilogy is littered with literal nudity, which was fairly new for the studio, but was more in line with the filmmaking styles of the new Hollywood era. Twins of Evil, in fact, was the sophomore feature of a very young 30-year-old John Howe, who would later go on to direct a number of different genre films like The Watcher in the Woods and Howling 4 and American Gothic. The general setup of Twins of Evil is that in a small, unidentified but seemingly Germanic village lies this group of Puritans led by Hammer horror staple Peter Cushing, who are sort of in a traveling parade of witch hunters. There is a series of mysterious murders that are happening across their village, and these Puritans arrive at the scene of the murder, and the first woman they find is clearly a witch, and they burn her alive. Meanwhile, while all this is happening, Peter Cushing has two nieces arriving from Venice after the death of their parents. These two nieces, as you can imagine, are the titular Twins of Evil, played by real-life twins and former Playboy playmates, the Collinson twins. You have Maria, who is soft-spoken and reserved and attempts to be a people-pleaser, and Frida, who is a wild card and who is more of the rebel, rejects her uncle's Puritanian views, generally wants to get into trouble. Meanwhile, there is Count Karnstein, who is a Lothario who is in good with the Emperor, but is a thorn in the side of Peter Cushing. Peter Cushing accuses the Count of being a Satanist. The Count says, "You have no proof, and if you dare come attack me, you're gonna get hell from the Emperor." Meanwhile, the Count is totally a Satanist, and starts causing all sorts of vampire nonsense in the village. The film is very much of its moment, talking about a conservative moral majority versus a young, radical, countercultural movement, if you will. There's all sorts of other political interplay with the village. The film's dialogue is as pulpy and delicious as you would want it to be, and at times very, very funny, like this conversation between the Count and his mute familiar.
Yes, Joachim, we know they are coming. We are waiting for them. They have crosses? And stakes? And axes?
I mean, when you're watching it, it almost plays out like a Mel Brooks film. It's fantastic. At the end of the day, the film just kind of has everything you would want from it. It has a really great atmosphere. The sets are incredible. Really good performances through and through. Peter Cushing is pretty fantastic in this movie. In the beginning of the film, he sort of exists as the dramatic straight man that allows everyone else to be a little campier, but by the end of the film, when his character realizes that his puritanical ways, his violent actions that he perpetrated in the name of God and all that is holy, has negatively affected the people that he cares about, the people he's closest to, his family, you can really see the weight of that affecting him. It's a far more nuanced performance than you would expect in this type of movie, and I think speaks not only to the caliber of his ability as an actor, but really that he never looked down on this material. I mean, the Hammer films were his main bread and butter for decades worth of his career. He treated them no differently than you would, say, a Pinter play. At the end of the day, the movie has everything you could possibly want. You have a great atmosphere, the score is fantastic. The sets are amazing. You have Peter Cushing spouting dense monologues about witchcraft and the devil seducing good Christians into a life of sin. You have, villagers raiding a castle, vampire decapitations, boobs, anything you could possibly want. And best of all, it is a crisp 87 minutes long. This thing moves at a clip that you wouldn't believe. It is the perfect, fun, atmospheric, sexy little horror movie. And best of all, you can find it on YouTube very easily. This is the exact type of movie you would want playing in the background at a Halloween party. Vampires, man. You can't beat it.
Alright, and thank you, Steve, for that amazing Halloween recommendation. Twins of Evil sounds like a heck of a film. I really need to find that one. That sounds amazing. As always, I think what's really fun about this episode is that it does a good job of differentiating how different me, Steve, and Connor are. Connor, who probably has the most contemporary taste out of the three of us. Steve, who probably has the best taste out of the three of us. And then me, coming out with something so deep in the left field bag, I don't know. Thank you so much so far with Connor and Steve. But we have one left, and that is actually a recommendation, a quick one from my sister Julia, who you might know from the Parasite episode, our very first episode of Film Asterisk, all the way back in May of 2020, and also talking about the Julie Taymor film Titus, the season 5 pre-opener, and also Ask the Public about The Batman from last season. She has also had quite a few appearances on the show, so take it away, Julia.
So, hello, my name is Julia. The film that I decided to talk about in this episode is probably one of the first horror films that I ever technically saw, but which is kind of interesting because it's a fairly obscure film. Definitely not one that many people know, and it's the 1925 American film, The Phantom of the Opera, which is a silent horror adaptation of Gaston Leroux's 1910 novel, The Phantom of the Opera. And people probably are more familiar with the more recent, film adaptation of The Phantom of the Opera with Gerard Butler, and obviously the musical as well, which is what that film is based on. Which is all, also good as well. It definitely has some horror elements, so that could be one to check out. But this one definitely would qualify as a kind of horror spooky movie, namely because it stars Lon Chaney, who was a famous silent film actor who was famous for his craft of transforming himself, mainly with makeup and prosthetics, for his roles, particularly in roles to portray grotesque or tortured characters. And so in this film adaptation, he certainly does that. I think as people are more familiar with from the Gerard Butler version of the film, he kind of has sort of a burned face and head, but in this version, Lon Chaney certainly takes on the more monstrous side of who the Phantom is supposed to look like. And so the basic plot of this 1925 version is fairly similar to the one that people know, which the Phantom becomes obsessed with a young singer named Christine, and he attempts to control the management of the opera house in which she sings to kind of make her the star of the show, and he kind of falls in love with her and kidnaps her. And then eventually things get out of hand, and the management of the opera house don't really want to play around with him, and so he decides to drop a chandelier on the audience in the end and burns down the opera house. So that's the basic plot. Definitely the silent film aspect of it, for one, makes it a little bit more of a obscure film genre to explore, which is always worth exploring. But I think in particular to see the ways in which Lon Chaney's Phantom is portrayed is very interesting. And one scene in particular comes to mind where Christine, the singer that he's obsessed with and has kind of brought down to his cave, stands behind him as he plays on the piano, and you can kind of see her trying to decide if she wants to take off his mask that he's had, hidden his face the whole time, and she kind of goes back and forth and hesitates, and then finally decides to rip the mask off from his face. Then all of a sudden you see this really kind of amazing shot of Lon Chaney, kind of, I would say, in a sort of jump scare, if you will, of his very grotesque and monstrous face that's just kind of in the center frame for everyone to see. So that's definitely a notable scene. But anyways, yeah, so that's my suggestion for today. I would also say the book dials up the horror notch to a whole new level too, which I think is interesting that you don't really see in the musical or in this version as much. There's a lot more violence and, like, I don't know, psychological thrill to the book version. So if anyone's interested, check out the 1910 novel of The Phantom of the Opera. So yeah, all right. Well, that is all I have to say for now. That is my 2 cents. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jules. And now that we have heard from all of our guest voices, we can kind of move on to the second half of the episode, which is my Halloween recommendation pick, which some of you might know is a film I've wanted to talk about, and I've slightly talked about off the air, but I'm very excited to bring it to the forefront right here, right now. It's funny. I feel like this would be where I do my ad break if this were Film but we're not on the Champlain Wave anymore. So there are no ad breaks, and it still feels kind of weird not having like a 30-second Sodexo ad in the middle of the segments. But listen, if you really want to know that there's a clear division, part 1, part 2, I'll just put a little soundbite here halfway through, and then we'll move on. All right, howdy. Welcome back to Film Asterisk. And our final Halloween movie recommendation comes from yours truly. And for my pick, I went with something a bit more classical. We're going even farther back than any of the films so far, because this is in fact a film my sister recommended we watch about 2 months ago, and I couldn't have thanked her enough. I mean, what a fantastic film this is. So I am going to be talking about the classic 1920 German expressionist classic Der Golem, wir in die Welt kam, or in English, The Golem, How He Came into the World. Now, this is actually the third of 3 films in the Golem series from director Paul Wegener, and the 1920 film is connected in a very interesting way to the 1915 original. Essentially, the Letterboxd description of the 1915 film is this: this mostly lost film, please check your attic, is often confused with director Paul Wegener's third and readily available interpretation of the legend, Der Golem, wir in die Welt kam, 1920. In this version of the Golem legend, the Golem, a clay statue brought to life by Rabbi Lowe in the 16th century Prague to save the Jews from an ongoing persecution by the city's rulers, is found in the rubble of an old synagogue in the 20th century. Brought to life by an antique dealer, the Golem is used as a menial servant. Eventually falling in love with the dealer's wife, it goes on a murderous rampage when its love for her goes unanswered. It's known that the director was pretty unhappy with how the first Golem film turned out, so this film kind of strives, the 1920 version, to be a more accurate attempt of the folklore Wegener was pulling from when adapting the Golem story to screen. And the context we are given to understand the 20th century narrative in the 1915 version is what the story actually is in the 1920 version, a clay statue brought to life by Rabbi Lowe in 16th century Prague. So yeah, the plot essentially follows Rabbi Lowe in the Jewish quarter of Prague, who is the head of the community and also tasked with predicting disasters. The Holy Roman Emperor and other Catholic leaders signs a decree declaring that the Jews must leave the city before the new moon and sends the squire Florian to deliver the decree. Lowe, meanwhile, begins to devise a way of defending the Jews. What's the solution? To quote the film, he must wrest the crucial life-giving word from the dreaded spirit Astaroth that will bring the Golem to life. He does so, and the Golem wreaks havoc on the town. So yeah, the Golem, who is it? The Golem itself is actually played by none other than director Paul Wegener. Yes, he is his own subject in this film, and to create the Golem character, Wagner used multiple makeups and prosthetics to make it look like he was made out of clay. He also constructed actual clay golems as stand-ins for shots where it becomes animated. So you have these actual not people golems, like statues, that the camera kind of fades into Paul Wegener's golem in a really interesting kind of early cinema effect. Now, as it is with many older films, it was for a time considered lost, and since its confirmed rediscovery, it has gone through many restoration processes. It should be mentioned as well that this film is the only of the Golem trilogy that remains. There has been no reason to believe either the 1915 or 1917 films survived past 25 years after their release. And this film is just so remarkable on its own merit for surviving, because this film is very unique since it shows a thriving, accepted Jewish community until the antagonistic Catholics in Rome needlessly attempt to exile them before they defend themselves and prove that they deserve to stay in their home. And a film like this to come out in 1920 Germany is pretty remarkable, and it's this exact kind of film that sought to be destroyed by Nazi Germany in World War II. But no, this thing persisted and lives on in a really unique and beautiful example of Jewish culture in early filmmaking. Now, the film was first restored in 1977 in Germany and scored by Earl Ernst Sasse. And this film is not readily available on home video, but in 2000 a second restoration was carried out, and this version is based on an export print transferred at 20 frames per second with its original tinting intact. Basically, if scenes are supposed to be shot like during the nighttime or the daytime, or they're supposed to have a specific mood, the filmmakers would tint it so you see like everything's kind of just like red or black, or green and black, or yellow and black, to kind of just describe kind of the what time of day it is, or like what sense of danger or excitement or whatever you're supposed to feel. That's how they conveyed that in early films. A third fully digital restoration, this time based on the original domestic negative, was completed by the Murnau Foundation in 2017 and was given 3 unique scores and is released on Blu-ray and DVD. You can buy it. And this kind of brings me into one of the points of why I picked this film, because there are a couple people who I think deserve a lot of credit for the iconic status of Der Golem in the German Expressionist movement in the 1920s, particularly Edgar G. Ulmer and Hans Perlzig for their absolutely bonkers set decoration and production design. Now, Edgar G. Ulmer was a director, an actor, a producer, a doer of all things film, but he also did set decoration and production design. And Hans Pilzig, on the other hand, has 1920s Der Golem as his only film credit, as he was a German architect and painter and helped Wagner to create the hyper-stylized version of the medieval Jewish ghetto in Prague. And this is what the film may be best known for, these crazy structures that curve and bend like ramshackle houses, pointed at the tops and overlaid with thick adobe-like exterior with the tile roofs, and the interiors are just the same, like caves and tunnels. And this is one of the defining features of the German Expressionist film movement in the 20s, and this is one of the first, if not the first, to spearhead it. And look at this film is so otherworldly, and you've seen this influence as well on films like Nightmare Before Christmas, or really any Henry Selick or Tim Burton stop-motion film. You see how a film like Der Golem has clearly influenced it. So in many ways, this film is just how a very unique subset of Halloween films that we adore today were influenced. And this being a live-action film with actual carpenters and architects and contractors working to create these set pieces, it's just insane. When you look at like a wide shot of a neighborhood and consider that so many people worked tirelessly to build that set, it's just really amazing. And so many scenes in here just fit the Halloween feeling so well. I mean, the summoning ceremony of Astaroth, the Golem's rebellion, the astral reading of stalls. I mean, it takes elements of demon summoning, folklore, and the unknown that today are like mainstays for Halloweeny films, and employs them in just like a really cool way. And if anything, the summoning of Astaroth is a scene. It's one of the best scenes of old cinema that I've ever had the pleasure of watching. The practical effects, the smoke, and the flames, and the lighting is all just really seamless for such an early film. And not to mention one of my other favorite aspects of this film, the score. Now, the piano score is so exciting and invigorating, and at other times horrifying, as the composers seem to use other sound effects like screeching and pinging metal to add to the sound design. It's just like insanely effective. And the film was first accompanied at release, the current release, by a score from German Jewish composer Hans Landsberger. And the original score was considered lost for decades until it was rediscovered in 2018. It was reconstructed, orchestrated, and premiered in Weimar in September of 2020. And if I have sold you on the film, there is a link I will post because it is free on YouTube. And it's a really good HD version. It's beautiful. So please check it out. And no payment necessary. And also, that score that I just mentioned, the reconstructed original score from September 2020, this is that version. It's that music, I believe. And back to the subject of the film. I mean, when I consider Der Golem as a mythic creature, it always strikes me that it seems to be one of the more underrated monsters and mythic creatures of the early like horror film world. That those being like Dracula, Frankenstein, Invisible Man, the Mummy, the Wolfman. You know, the American monsters, the universal monsters and creatures. But the source material for the Golem, a figure made out of clay with super strength, created to protect the Jewish people, but is also imbued with the spirit of a demon. It's very interesting because it shares so many thematic details, and yet dates back much farther than the rest. Maybe not as far back as the Mummy, but, you know. The Golem is a man-made terror. Much like how Frankenstein and the Invisible Man are experiments on the human form, the Golem is a product of humanity striving for otherworldly powers, abilities, protection, or advantages. And often in that pursuit of cheating mortality, we as a society face the consequences. The Invisible Man wreaks havoc on his town, stealing and killing. Frankenstein fears fire and the misunderstanding of Bavarian townsfolk leads to him terrorizing the town below, and the Golem is possessed by Astaroth and starts throwing people out of windows. It's chaos. Like so many horror and Halloween-y films of this nature, there's an air of the film being a cautionary tale, where I think a natural question we've begun to ask ourselves in recent decades persists from even centuries ago. What if we push it too far? What if our search for something greater brings upon us a greater terror that may destroy us? And this, I think, is a universal fear within many of us, and subconsciously films like this is our answer, our response to that fear and uncertainty. So if you want to watch a beautiful, unique, impactful, riveting Halloween movie this season, look no further than 1920's Der Golem. I cannot recommend it enough. Oh, and I gotta share this fun fact. During the summoning of Astaroth, the scene ends with the rabbi being overwhelmed by bolts of lightning. And if you pause the film, which, thanks to the power of YouTube, is super easy, you can see the life-giving word that is needed for the Golem to be animated spelled out and echoed in the lightning. Which, like, no one would ever be able to catch that. But, like, what an awesome detail. It's the little things, I swear. So that is my recommendation for a Halloween-y film this year. I hope this episode has provided a couple ideas for new stuff to check out from the entire history of film. We really are, like, all the way from this year to 1920. A lot of appreciation for Connor and Steve and Jules coming on here and adding their picks. Very nice to have them on. Again, the link for Der Golem is below if you want to check it out. It's not that long either. It's only like 75 minutes, quick watch. And yeah, that's really all I have for this week. Thank you so much for listening. And have an awesome rest of your week and a fantastic Halloween. You'll be hearing from me next time. I'll see you.